Yeah, so why don't I just tell you guys a little bit about myself before I dive into the talk. Thanks. My name is Shuli. I've been a professional photographer for 10 years, photographing critical infrastructure, so things like cargo shipping and energy, railroads, all this kind of stuff. And then several years ago, and I was doing it commercially as well as editorially for like magazines. And several years ago, I started to become really interested in what the internet looks like. The cross-section was photographing energy, and then learning like 5 years ago that data centers consume almost as much energy as small cities in some cases. And I kind of then had this image that we have like 500,000 small cities layered on top of our existing physical infrastructure, and we don't see them or understand them, but it's the things that we use all the time, like to connect with Dropbox or Facebook or whatever. And so I took my approach that I've always taken, which is if we can see it, if I can photograph the physical infrastructure of the internet, then we can kind of see how all the pieces come together and understand how it works. But I'm about to tell you why that was only just the beginning of the story. So I guess I'll start. So looking at the history of this information era from the beginning of the internet and to where it's going, we know that the internet is still pretty young. It's still in its infancy. What's happening today, the policies that are being written, the laws that are being made, and I should turn off my notifications, are being written by lawmakers that really don't have a very good understanding of what the internet really is. And they're influenced by the incumbents who have deep wallets. This will shape the future of the internet as we use it today. In the case of like net neutrality, that almost went a certain way, and then we kind of pushed it in what I think is the right way. We don't see or understand the internet because just like a lot of infrastructure, it's purposefully obscured. Like a lot of infrastructure is just hidden from us. Also because a lot of its properties, like spectrum, wireless, and protocol, are invisible. And also because the terminology that was handed down to us, like cloud, is abstracted and actually is meaningless. It's not really pointing to anything, right? And because of all this, we don't understand, most of us, all the ways that we give extremely personal information about ourselves, and worse, are the ways in which all that information is collected, analyzed, and sold to create a profile of each individual so detailed that we're actually products, not consumers. If we don't learn to see and understand the way all of this works, then we'll continue to be passive participants in shaping the very system that we almost completely depend on. So let's take a step back and look at a little bit of history. In the 1960s, the US was consumed by the Cold War, and we began to worry about what would happen in the event of a nuclear war. Our systems of command and information were centralized back then, so that if one was taken out, the entire system was gone. Like the individuals couldn't actually communicate with each other. So Paul Barron, I hope I'm saying his name right, who worked at RAND, came up with his really groundbreaking theory of distributed networks. This is from his memo or paper. And he suggested that we need to move from a centralized model to eventually a distributed model. And along the way, we're going through a decentralized model. Right? So decentralized means that there's no one point of control, there are many points of control, and that's a redundant system. That's great. Like if one gets taken out, or even if several get taken out, the whole system isn't failing, right? Like they'll just route around the broken links, and that's the system that we have today. Distributed networks are computers, right, that talk directly to each other, and they make up the network. Like a mesh network is a distributed network. But why are we still stuck in this decentralized system if we know that distributed is what we want? And that's because the physical infrastructure of the internet is actually built on existing infrastructure. It's built on the back of existing infrastructure, and that template naturally leads to a decentralized model, to consolidation points. So let's look at the core components of the physical layer, which is what I spent several years photographing. I'm sure some of you have seen the OSI model. Sometimes it's a TCP/IP model, or any of these models that sort of show the layers of the internet. And the physical is just the beginning. This is a more complicated version of that. And all the layers that sit on top of the physical are emergent properties of the physical layer. It doesn't mean that the physical layer controls them. It's just sort of a template for these connections, sort of like how the mind is an emergent property of the brain. So I'll show you the core components, which are fiber, subsea cables, data centers, which are core networks, and interconnection facilities. So this is a dark fiber, which is neutral fiber, and ISP provider in New York City. And they lay fiber optic cables through the manholes of the streets, and then they have to get out to individual buildings or points. I'm really excited about this photo because it made it into Wikipedia as the definition of dark fiber without my knowing, but I think that's so cool. And I only found out because one day I wanted to get the exact definition. I'm like, wait, that looks really familiar. And inside the manholes, this is inside of a manhole, they're a mess. This is our critical infrastructure. It's not just fiber, it's copper, it's telephony, it's electricity, and it's just layers and layers of years and years of building this stuff out. Subsea cables, so like fiber optic cables, subsea cables stretch all over the globe, millions of miles of them. This is a map from telegeography. I don't like the 2015 map, so I'm showing you the 2014 map, but it's pretty similar. So I went on a ship and photographed how a ship sort of lays cable in shallow water and in deep sea. And these are very similar cables to the ones that I just showed you, except that they have more sheathing around them, and they're slightly modified to transmit data over long distances. So fiber optic cables are just strands of glass, like each strand's thinner than the human hair, and light is pulsed through the glass strands and then modulated to carry information. So that's how it works. And then it just sends out on, off, which is zeros and ones. So this was actually really cool to be on the ship. And this is a deep sea cable that goes through the engine. And this is a repeater that actually just amplifies the signal. So there's loss of light as the further the information goes, and then you need this amplifier that kind of boosts the signal and keeps it going. And this is the plow that digs the cable in shallow water. So 150 meters and less is shallow water. And they'll bury it because in shallow waters you're susceptible to cuts from anchors or fishing ships or whatever. So it helps to bury it, but cable cuts are actually really common. They occur every week, and it costs $1 million to repair them, but they just send out a ship, pick up both ends of the cable that are GPS tagged, splice them together, and then just drop them back in the ocean. So easy. And that's the cable and the repeater going in the ocean. And this is the tank that has the reels of cable. So it has the shallow water, which is this, and then the deep sea. And that's me playing basketball on the cable tank. That's how secure they are. And this is a deep sea cable. So you see it's basically the same thing, but it doesn't have that protective sheathing around it. And core networks are networks that carry high bandwidth. So like Facebook is a core network. Verizon is a core network. Google is a core network. This is the Facebook data center in Prineville, Oregon. It was a very cool experience. So as I was standing there, there's just these, rows and rows of aisles and aisles of servers that are just humming this really loud noise. And I was thinking to myself as I was there, I'm like, wait, there's 1 billion people, plus or minus, using the system, not all at the same time, but mostly. And this is the size of 3 football fields, this data center. And this is the sound of everyone kind of either on their desktop or on their phone, swiping and doing all this information. And this felt like a consolidation point. This is a decentralized system where you have these consolidated points of power. It's not, they have multiple data centers and they're redundant, but there's still a point of consolidation that you have to communicate with the servers to get the information back. And the heart of the internet is interconnection facilities. So where 2 core networks come to physically meet and connect is called an interconnection facility, also known as a carrier hotel. I prefer the latter because it doesn't sound like a hotel. And you'll have 2 networks that bring not their network equipment, but cables to these patch panels, which is what we see here. And this would be one network, and this is another network, and they connect through these patch panels. Cogent would be one of these companies we really haven't heard of, but they're sort of big. And then the last part of this is actually the spectrum itself. Even though we can't see it, it's still a part of the infrastructure. I'm sure a lot of you remember from high school physics, the electromagnetic spectrum, which is all possible light waves. We can only see the visible part is such a small part, but all this part below is used for telecommunications. So all the way down from the low end, which is 1 megahertz, up to 30 gigahertz plus. And each each segment of the spectrum has different properties that make it good or bad, right? So like on the very low end is low frequency, and that means long waves. So the military sort of blocks that for themselves to communicate with submarines. And I'm not going to get too much into spectrum. It's a really fascinating area, but in the same way that we had the battle over net neutrality, network neutrality, there's another sort of looming thing on the horizon, and that's spectrum. The way we use spectrum right now is we allocate it as a finite resource, right? Like I actually don't have the chart, but the FCC has these charts that everything is blocked and sold. And so the players with the deepest pockets can actually buy these huge chunks of bandwidth, and they don't use it. They use like 40% of it, but it also means that they're blocking other people from using it, right? So the thing that's sort of coming up now that the FCC and others are trying to change is to make this a dynamic shared spectrum so that you can pay for priority, but if you're not using it, other people can use it or other entities can use it. I can talk about that for a while, but I won't. So why, if we know that distributed is really the way we should be going, why are we still stuck in a decentralized model? Again, like I said, our infrastructure, the infrastructure of the internet is built on the backs of the infrastructure that we're inheriting, right? So like in the 70s, the railroads actually started laying fiber and selling excess capacity off to networks. They realized they could. And this became a really good model to work with because the railroads own their own land. So they lease out or sell the rights of way to fiber optic or to networks so that they can then build their version of a highway around the US. But they use railroads because you're not dealing, the railroads are their own entity since like the Transcontinental Railroad. For every mile they built, they got all this land, and there's no real like federal oversight over it. I mean, there is, but like if crime happens, the FBI doesn't come out, like the railroad deals with it. So if you want to lay fiber around the nation, the best way to do it is just deal with one entity, right? Like not every town and city and state. So this is a map of the fiber highway, basically, that we have. And it looks eerily similar to the map of the railroads. And that naturally leads to consolidation, right? Like I mentioned, Facebook is a consolidated point, or data centers are. And that's great, it's redundant. But let's look at some of the implications that happen when we are in a centralized system. I'm going to pick on Google because I don't think they're inherently evil, but they're not. They're good, but we all use them, and I think we all just click to consent. I mean, this is actually built on Google Slides, so I'm just as guilty as any of us, right? But on their privacy policy online, they'll tell you that they log your calls, actually, if you use Google Voice, the duration, all the metadata in the same way that our cell phones are tracked by the NSA. And when you use Google services, they actually take your location in ways that are extremely detailed because our devices have accelerometers and gyroscopes to sort of show us where exactly we are, if we're going upstairs, if we're running or whatever, and networks actually tap into that and use that information about you. They also, as we know, they're automated systems. It's not a person, goes through and analyzes your content, including emails, to provide you personally relevant product or features, but also to profile, to build a profile about you. It's not that they're trying to do something terrible, but there is a profile built on us. And their servers are encrypted, some of them, or most of them, but that doesn't mean it's encrypted from them seeing the information. It's encrypted from hackers to make it hard for hackers. And Evernote too, which I use, we all use, they, as a rule, don't monitor your information, but they can. If they feel that the rights of Evernote or its users are threatened, they can just go through your notes. And they do go through your notes. And I'm not saying like systematically, but it's, if you don't put your passwords on Evernote, don't put like deep thoughts in your journal on Evernote because this is being read, and you better believe it's being collected. And where does all this go? To data brokers. Axiom is one of the biggest data brokers, and anyone can go on their website. This is a snapshot of their website. Under products are these really interesting segments that advertisers can buy, packages packages of us. So we've become the product, right? Like holiday package or big game or whatever. Bruce Schneier, some of you I'm sure know him, wrote this great book that all of you should read called Data and Goliath, and in it he says that we are the products and not the consumers, and he's absolutely right. It's a very, very big industry, $200 billion of annual revenue, which is $200 billion that we're giving away for free. That's one part of it. But we are analyzed and broken down into specific consumer types in order to maximize our spending potential. And aside from commercial tracking, we also know that the NSA tracks us as well. We heard of PRISM, and this was made possible by tapping into subsea cables. So I know from people that some cables were mysteriously cut and mysteriously repaired. And the way it works is that they put this like thing that splits off light, right? Like if you split light, it's not losing information. So they would just take a segment of that and just monitor all traffic coming in and out of the US, which is 80% of traffic, global traffic. So both Schneier and Hugh, who wrote Prehistory of the Cloud, discussed the idea of the panopticon, which is this philosopher in the 1700s conceived and designed the panopticon. His name is Jeremy Bentham. And the idea is having a single watchman observe all the inmates from a central tower. The inmates never know when they're being watched and end up behaving as though they're being watched at all times, effectively controlling behavior. Anytime we have mass surveillance, it's really an indication of a controlled state, and that's exactly what Hugh says in Prehistory of the Cloud. He says we're moving from a sovereign state to a controlled society. How does this affect us today? It actually does. A lot of us know that our credit is being monitored, so we behave well. If you have any understanding of the ways in which information is being collected on you, you may not look up certain things online. You shouldn't look up certain things online using Google, like medical things. Don't do it. Don't Google it, because then you have that on your profile. And this is what we do this is the information we exchange when we're giving these freebie accounts. The most common response I've heard from people regarding their data being surveilled by either the government or a private entity is, well, my life is boring and I have nothing to hide. You do have something to hide. We all have something to hide, which is our extremely personal information, right? Like what we're thinking, who we're corresponding with, our thoughts, our medical issues, whatever it is. And why should we be on the defense about this? Why is our default, I have nothing to hide? We're not guilty of anything yet, hopefully. And some of this stuff might seem harmless to people that don't fully understand this, to those who call us paranoid or radical or whatever. But right now, and in the near future, there are more sort of almost sci-fi scenarios that really bring this home, right? So like, this is the potential of the internet, right? We have self-driving cars, and the good part of it is that we won't have to drive. Like, we'll just be sitting in this car and we can read our paper and drink our coffee, and fewer accidents and a safer world. But we do know that these journalists over the summer hacked into a Jeep, whatever it was, Grand Cherokee, through the computer system, were able to stop the car on the highway, were able to make the windshield wipers go back and forth, blasted the music, the guy couldn't turn it down. And I mean, they were doing this to a guy who knew that this was happening. It was a journalist, but this is a thing that happens. Prosthetic limbs are really cool in a lot of ways, because people are able to walk and use their arms in ways that are almost human-like. They're robotics, but they're computers. And if they're hacked, that means if you miss a payment on your $250,000 leg, they can just shut the leg down, or who knows, make you walk to the hospital or something, I don't know. And home security, which a lot of us use surveillance cameras to either monitor our home or our pets, or let people in if you have Airbnb or something. It's a really cool system, but that is extremely susceptible to being hacked. So even if your home isn't completely taken over, people know when you're home or not, and that's not great. That's the opposite of what we want. So there's a couple of steps we need to take to de-radicalize the truth, to make it actually something that's common. And also a couple of things that we need to do to move from this decentralized system to a distributed system. The first is language, right? Like if we see it, we can talk about it. And why is that? Words are symbols that point to objects, emotions, and concepts. The word chair doesn't point at one specific thing. It points at the archetype of that symbol, right? And so whenever we use an instance of a chair, it connects back to the prototype. It can be the chair you're sitting on. It can be the stool that I'm on. It's not a specific thing. We don't have symbols for the internet. The language that we use is cloud, and it's meaningless. I don't know why this isn't coming up. There it is. So mysterious. And what is it pointing to? If we can have visuals to accurately create and map concepts, then we can use words that do actually point to a symbol, and we can accurately talk about the system in ways that are accurate. And then we can make informed decisions for ourselves, for our collective societies. And this is the stuff I'm working on right now, is actually to make visualizations of what the invisible properties of the internet look like. So this is not mine. It's visualizing sound, and I'm working on doing something similar for visualizing the spectrum so that we can see this actual physical resource and the way it's allocated and the way we use it. We can visualize the way we communicate with cell phone towers and have accurate information about what we call radiation and how to build better networks around it. And then the last thing we can do is all of us, you guys here that are really interested in this stuff, is actually be the leaders of this movement to go and take the stuff that you're learning here today and apply it to build your own mesh communities or your own private cloud and then talk about it with other people. Because then that doesn't make it so weird and mysterious. But it always takes people to lead a movement before there's a tipping point, before it just becomes this common information. And there are people that won't do it. It's not easy, it's not convenient. It's not easy for you to go and get your own domain or host your own email. That's so difficult. But the convenient parts of it are the parts that we just discussed, are the parts that make it extremely easy for anything that you're doing online to be monitored and collected. And we need alternatives when we're presented with problems, and we have alternatives. Otherwise, we feel doomed. And this is how we can truly change the course of history and how we can fulfill the promise of a free, open, neutral, and incredible internet. Thank you. So, I went over, or I went exactly 30 minutes, but I think if you guys want to stay and ask questions, that's totally fine. If anyone has any.
Have you experimented with photographing invisible spectrums, like leakage of signals?
I think, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I want to do, and I haven't figured out ways to make the invisible light visible, so I think what I'm doing now is actually becoming a coder in this 3-month immersive thing, and I'm going to make interactive visuals that show how all this works, and like a web-based platform that will show this. Yes?
I'd be happy to show you afterwards a couple of servers and services and hardware and software for visualizing spectrum.
Oh, that'd be great. I'll follow up on that. Thank you. Cool. Yeah.
Sorry if you said this already, but what's the best place to see like market photos?
Oh, sure. At invisiblenetworks.co or my full name, ShuliHallak.com. There's all the photos that I showed and more on those sites. Thank you for asking. Cool. Anyone else? All right, thank you so much. Thank you.